My twin brother framed me for armed robbery at 18, and my parents testified against me without hesitation. Hi, I'm Lucas Meyer, 31, and the first time my mother ever truly destroyed my life was when I was 18 years old and trusted my family more than the truth. I have a twin brother. Identical. Same height, same face, same voice when we were younger. The kind of twins teachers mixed up, neighbors confused, even relatives sometimes hesitated before saying our names. But inside our house, there was never any confusion about who mattered. My brother's name is Adrian. Adrian was the miracle, the golden boy, the one my parents talked about like he was already successful before he'd done anything. I was the other one, the spare, the kid they tolerated because biology required it. Growing up, the favoritism wasn't subtle. It was industrial strength. Adrian got praise for effort. I got silence for results. If I brought home top grades, my mom would nod and ask if I'd taken out the trash. If Adrian failed a class, my parents blamed the teacher for not seeing his potential. By the time we were teenagers, Adrian had figured out the rules of the house perfectly. If something went wrong, he just had to look mildly disappointed and say my name. And my parents would finish the story for him. Broken window? My fault. Missing cash? My fault. Suspicious smell from the garage? Obviously me. I learned early that truth didn't matter. Only narrative did. So I focused on escape. At 17, I enrolled in a technical trade program for electrical work. I worked evenings at a building supply store, saved every dollar, and counted down the months until graduation. Adrian, meanwhile, announced he was going to study international business. My parents paid for everything. Tuition, apartment, spending money. He treated college like a suggestion. By the time we were 18, we still lived under the same roof, but in completely different realities. Then came November 2013. I came home exhausted after a double shift, dropped my jacket on the chair, and fell asleep in front of the TV around 10:30 p.m. Adrian wasn't home, which meant nothing. He rarely was. I woke up to blinding light and someone screaming at me to get on the floor. 3 police officers, guns drawn. My living room felt suddenly very small. I remember thinking, this has to be a mistake. It wasn't. They cuffed me before I could even sit up. Read me my rights like it was routine. Told me there'd been a robbery at a medical supply warehouse less than 3 miles away. Someone had broken in, stolen controlled medications, and assaulted a night worker badly enough to send him to the hospital. Then one of the officers said the words that changed everything. We found evidence in your vehicle. My car, parked in the driveway. In that moment, standing barefoot on my own carpet, I knew exactly what had happened. And I knew exactly who my parents were going to believe. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and disinfectant, the kind of place where hope goes to get processed and stamp denied. They sat me in a gray interrogation room with a metal table bolted to the floor. My wrists were cuffed in front of me like that was supposed to make me feel better. It didn't. Every minute that passed, I kept thinking my parents would show up and clear this up. That they'd say, there's no way Lucas did this. They did show up. Just not the way I expected. My mother walked in first, already crying. My father followed, jaw tight, arms crossed like he was bracing himself for disappointment. They didn't look at me right away. They looked at the detective. When he asked if I'd been under financial stress lately, my mom answered instantly. Yes, she said. He's been struggling. Always stressed about money. I stared at her. I hadn't told her anything like that. I'd been working, saving, planning. But the words kept coming. She said I'd been distant, secretive, that I'd been lying about where I was going some nights, that I'd seemed angry lately. Every sentence landed like a brick. My dad nodded along, adding his own commentary. Said I'd always had a temper. That Adrian was the calmer one, the responsible one. That this whole thing was shocking, but not impossible. I tried to interrupt. Tried to say Adrian wasn't home that night. Tried to explain that my car keys were always on the hook by the door. That anyone in the house could have taken it. The detective didn't even look at me when I spoke. They told me what they'd found in my trunk. A hoodie, gloves, a mask, and several sealed bottles of stolen medication, wrapped neatly in plastic. They showed me photos. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might throw up. I kept saying the same thing over and over. It wasn't me. It was Adrian. He set me up. The detective finally sighed and leaned back in his chair. Your brother has an alibi, he said. His girlfriend says he was with her all night. Her parents confirm it. Phone records back it up. Of course they did. I was charged that night. Armed robbery, assault, possession of stolen property. Bail was set higher than I could afford in 10 lifetimes. As they led me away, I looked back at my parents, expecting, hoping, for hesitation, doubt, anything. My mom was crying into my dad's shoulder. Not for me, for the son she thought she'd lost. My trial happened fast. Too fast for anyone who was actually innocent. I was 18, sitting at a defense table that felt way too big for me, wearing a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit, while a public defender I'd met exactly twice whispered damage control like it was strategy. He was honest with me, at least. He said the evidence wasn't direct, but it was clean. Clean enough to bury me. The hoodie and mask in my trunk. The stolen meds. My parents' statements. The timeline. And the part that mattered most, motive. They painted me as the broke twin. The resentful one. The screw-up who couldn't stand watching his successful brother get everything handed to him. They said I snapped. Said I needed money. Said I was desperate. My mother took the stand on the second day. I still remember the sound of her chair scraping against the floor as she sat down. She wouldn't look at me. Not once. She talked about my pattern of dishonesty. About how I'd always struggled with authority. About how she wished she'd done more to help me before things got this bad. My father followed. Calm. Controlled. Said he loved me, but he had to be honest. Said Adrian had always been dependable. That if Adrian said he was with his girlfriend that night, then he was. Adrian sat behind them, hands folded, eyes red, playing the role perfectly. When he testified, he said it was the hardest thing he'd ever done. That he couldn't believe his own twin would hurt someone like that. That he wished it had been him instead. The jury ate it up. When the verdict came back guilty on all counts, I didn't feel shock. I felt hollow. The judge said he was being lenient because of my age and clean record. Gave me 6 years. Said I could be out earlier with good behavior. 6 years might as well have been a lifetime. I was processed into state prison 3 weeks later. Hair cut. Clothes stripped. Identity replaced with a number. My cellmate was a man in his 40s who barely spoke and stared at the wall like he was already dead. That first night, lying on a thin mattress under buzzing lights, I finally understood something. Adrian hadn't just framed me. My parents had finished the job, and I swore to myself, staring at the cracked ceiling, that if I ever got out, I wouldn't just survive. I would make sure the truth burned everything they'd built. Prison didn't break me right away. At first, it just erased me. Every day was the same mechanical loop. Count, food, work, count again. Time didn't move forward, it stacked. Weeks blended into months. Birthdays passed without acknowledgement. I learned quickly that emotion was a liability. Fear made you visible. Anger made you a target. So I became quiet. I worked wherever they'd put me until I landed in the prison library. That job saved my life. The librarian, an older guy named Mr. Caldwell, noticed I kept reading after my shifts ended. Not novels, manuals, law books, case summaries. One day he slid a thick criminal procedure book across the desk and said, "You're not reading like someone killing time." I started studying everything. Evidence law, appeals, wrongful convictions. I wasn't planning revenge yet. I was learning survival. Learning how people like me disappeared into the system, while people like Adrian never even touched it. Letters from home never came. Not one. I wrote it first. Long, careful letters. Asked my parents to reconsider, to look at timelines, to remember who I actually was. I told them Adrian had done this before in smaller ways, that he'd always set me up. Silence. After a year, I stopped writing. The only person who showed up was my uncle, my mom's older brother, Daniel. He drove 4 hours each way just to sit across from me behind thick glass and say, "I believe you." That sentence mattered more than anything else. Daniel started keeping notes. About Adrian's spending. His sudden truck. His new apartment. His business that somehow launched right after my conviction. None of it made sense on paper, and Daniel knew it. I served 4.5 years before being released early for good behavior. When I walked out, I was 23. A felony record. No family. No money. Daniel picked me up and hugged me so hard I almost collapsed. He had a room ready. Clean clothes. A future I hadn't dared imagine. And then I went to work. I rebuilt myself brick by brick. Got licensed. Learned the business side of electrical contracting. Worked 70-hour weeks. Built a reputation. Saved money. And quietly, patiently, I started building a case. Because innocence isn't enough. You need proof. By the time I was 26, My life looked stable from the outside. I had my own small electrical contracting business, 2 steady employees, and a beat-up pickup that actually belonged to me. I paid taxes. I paid rent. I slept through the night. All things prison teaches you not to take for granted. Adrian, meanwhile, was unraveling. Daniel fed me updates quietly, never editorializing. Just facts. Adrian's business had collapsed. Too many expenses, not enough legit income. He'd moved back in with my parents. Same house. Same driveway. Same hook where my car keys used to hang. What stuck with me was this. He still had money. Not rich, but not broke either. Cash appeared when it shouldn't have. Electronics sold online below market price. Short-term flips. No paper trail. Same pattern, different product. That's when I hired a private investigator. His name was Ethan Ross. Former detective. Specialized in wrongful convictions. He didn't promise miracles. Just work. He confirmed what I already suspected. Adrian's alibi girlfriend had lied. Not completely, but enough. She admitted Adrian showed up much later than she'd testified. Said he pressured her. Said she'd been young and scared and thought she was protecting someone she loved. It wasn't enough to reopen my case. Not yet. So we waited. And we planned. I stayed off my family's radar completely. New look. Beard. Different glasses. Different posture even. Prison changes how you move, and construction changes how you're built. I put on muscle. Learned to slow my reactions. Learned how to listen without reacting. Then I built a fake identity. New name. New online presence. New job history. A small reseller looking to buy electronics in bulk. Ethan helped me drill the backstory until I could recite it half asleep. We practiced conversations. Triggers. How to guide someone into bragging without pushing. Adrian had always loved attention. That never changed. When I finally reached out, he bit immediately. We met at a diner halfway between his house and the city. Neutral ground. Busy enough to blend in. I wore the camera under my jacket. Audio clean. Legal. Tested twice that morning. He didn't recognize me. Not even a flicker. He talked. And talked. About his hustle. His mistakes. His big break years ago. About how sometimes you have to do something ugly to get ahead. And then, casually, like he was talking about a bad investment, he said it. He robbed the warehouse. He framed his twin. He laughed about it. I sat there nodding while my hands went numb. He said our parents never questioned it because they knew I was the problem. He said prison probably did me a favor. When we shook hands goodbye, he asked when I wanted to place my first order. I drove 3 blocks before pulling over and shaking so hard I couldn't hold the steering wheel. Ethan listened to the recording once. Then again. Then he smiled and said, "We've got him." Filing the motion felt surreal. I'd spent years imagining this moment, and when it finally arrived, it wasn't dramatic. It was paperwork. Stacks of it. Affidavits. Transcripts. Audio authentication reports. My lawyer, Rachel Moore, sharp, calm, and allergic to nonsense, kept reminding me that winning wasn't about emotion. It was about precision. The state did not like being told it had put the wrong man in prison. They pushed back immediately. Questioned how the recording was obtained. Suggested entrapment. Hinted that maybe I was manipulating my brother out of bitterness. Rachel shut that down piece by piece. One-party consent state. No threats. No inducements. Just a man bragging because he thought he was safe. Adrian was arrested 3 months later. Same charges I'd faced. Plus perjury. Plus obstruction. Plus evidence tampering. When the news broke, my phone exploded. People who hadn't spoken to me in a decade suddenly remembered my name. Old classmates. Former coworkers. Distant relatives who'd quietly believed the story my parents told. My parents didn't call. Not when Adrian was arrested. Not when my conviction was officially vacated. Not when the judge stood in open court and said the words, "wrongful conviction." The state cut me a compensation check. Not nearly enough to buy back lost years, but enough to buy something else. Leverage. I expanded my business. Bought a modest house. Built something that couldn't be taken from me with a lie. Adrian's trial was fast. The recording crushed him. The girlfriend's revised testimony sealed it. The jury didn't deliberate long. When the verdict came back guilty, I didn't feel joy. I felt relief. At sentencing, I was allowed to speak. I didn't yell. I didn't insult him. I just listed facts. Birthdays missed. Years lost. Letters unanswered. Parents who testified against the wrong son and never looked back. Adrian stared at the floor the entire time. He got 12 years. That's when my parents finally ran out of excuses. And that's when my mother showed up on my porch. I almost didn't recognize my mother at first. She was sitting on the edge of my porch step like she didn't know whether she was allowed to knock. Her hair was mostly gray now. She looked smaller, like gravity had finally decided to take its share. When I parked and got out of my truck, she stood up too fast and nearly lost her balance. She started crying before she even said my name. "I'm sorry," she said, over and over, like repetition could turn it into something real. I let her talk. I didn't interrupt. I'd waited years for this conversation, and I wanted to hear exactly how she planned to rewrite history. She told me my father's health was failing, that they were drowning financially, that defending Adrian had wiped out their savings, that they were about to lose the house, that her medication was getting expensive, that they had no one else. Then she said the words she hadn't earned the right to say. "Family." I asked her one question. "When did you know it was Adrian?" She froze. She stumbled through half sentences. Said things were confusing back then. Said everything happened so fast. Said Adrian sounded so convincing. I reminded her, calmly, that she had sat in a courtroom and described me as dangerous. That she'd never visited me, never written, never asked if she was wrong, even after my conviction was overturned. I told her the truth. I could help. I had the money. I had the ability to make their problems disappear. And I wouldn't, because she'd already made her choice when it mattered. I gave her 1 minute to leave before I called the police. She didn't believe me until I pulled out my phone. She left crying, saying I'd regret this. She called nonstop after that. Voicemails, new numbers, guilt, fear, anger. I blocked them all. Then my father tried. Same result. A month later, they showed up at my job site. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I told the site's supervisor they were trespassing. Security escorted them out while other workers watched. My father tried to pull rank as my parent. Security didn't care. That was the last time I saw them in person. 6 months after that job site incident, Daniel called me with an update I already expected. They lost the house. Foreclosure went through quietly. No dramatic final stand. Just paperwork, a deadline, and keys handed over. They moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on the far side of town. My father was still working at 68, despite his doctor telling him he shouldn't be. My mother's health kept declining, and they were rationing medications some months. Daniel had cut them off completely by then. He told me he was done watching them destroy themselves while pretending none of it was their fault. Adrian tried writing me once from prison. I recognized the return address immediately. I didn't open the letter. I wrote return to sender and dropped it back in the mailbox. That was the moment I realized something important. Closure isn't a conversation. It's a decision. Today, I'm 31. My business employs 5 people. I own my home. I'm in a steady relationship with someone who knows my entire past and doesn't flinch when I talk about it. I sleep peacefully. I wake up without dread. I build a life no one can rewrite for me. People sometimes ask if I regret not helping my parents. I don't, because regret belongs to the people who had choices and picked cruelty. I didn't destroy my family. I survived them. And that, finally, was enough. You'd think that after everything was over, life would slow down. It didn't. Once my name was officially cleared, doors started opening in ways I wasn't prepared for. Lawyers called. Advocacy groups reached out. Universities asked if I'd speak about wrongful convictions. At first, I said no to everything. I'd spent years being seen as something I wasn't. I liked being invisible again. But then a letter arrived from a kid named Evan, 20 years old, sitting in county jail awaiting trial. He said he'd read about my case online. Said his own family didn't believe him. Said he was scared. I wrote back. Then another letter came. And another. Soon I was corresponding with half a dozen inmates. Men who'd been chewed up by the same machine and told it was justice. That's when I realized my story wasn't finished just because my sentence was over. I wasn't just rebuilding a life. I was inheriting a responsibility. By 32, my electrical company was stable enough that I didn't need to be on site every day. That gave me time, something prison had taught me to value differently than money. I partnered with a local legal nonprofit that worked on appeals for wrongful convictions. I didn't fund them outright. I funded investigations, private investigators, expert witnesses, the boring, expensive stuff that actually wins cases. I didn't put my name on plaques. I stayed quiet. Every time a case failed, it hurt more than I expected. Every time one succeeded, I felt something close to peace, but sharper, more fragile. Because freedom always arrives late for someone. My parents tried reaching out again around that time. Not directly. Through distant relatives. Through church friends. Through people who thought forgiveness was a favor you owed. I said no every time. Some bridges don't collapse. They're burned deliberately. Daniel passed away 2 years later. Heart attack. Sudden. No warning. At his funeral, I stood alone in the back row. My parents were there. We didn't speak. We didn't make eye contact. They looked smaller than I remembered, like grief had finally stripped away the certainty they'd used as armor their whole lives. Daniel left me a box. Inside were notebooks, years of notes, dates, observations, copies of bank statements, timelines. He'd been building my case long before I ever knew how to spell appeal. At the bottom was a note, written in shaky handwriting. You were always the honest one. Don't let anyone rewrite that. That was the day I decided to formally fund a scholarship for trade school students with felony records, people trying to build something real after the system labeled them disposable. It felt right. Adrian appealed once. It went nowhere. He never wrote again. My parents eventually stopped trying too, not because they understood, but because they ran out of ways to reach me. Silence, I learned, is sometimes the only boundary people respect. I don't hate them. Hate takes energy. I spent mine elsewhere. Sometimes I wonder who I would have been if that night had never happened. If I'd gone straight from trade school into a normal life. If my parents had chosen differently. Then I remember this version of me wouldn't exist. The man who doesn't lie to himself. The man who knows exactly how fragile freedom is. The man who survived being erased. Last month, I stood in front of a classroom full of apprentices. Guys in their early 20s, steel-toed boots, nervous eyes. I told them the truth. That life doesn't care if you're innocent. That family doesn't always mean safe. That systems fail people quietly every day. And that survival isn't loud or glamorous. It's stubborn. Afterward, one kid stayed behind. He said, "How did you not give up?" I thought about prison ceilings. About unread letters. About a brother who smiled while I disappeared. About an uncle who drove 4 hours just to say I believe you. Then I answered honestly. Because the truth doesn't stop existing just because no one wants to hear it. And for the first time, I knew, completely, that my story was finished exactly where it needed to end.